Most people think selling is about talking, about pitching, about convincing someone to buy something they probably don't need, and that's exactly why most people are terrible at it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you are struggling to sell, whether it's a product, a service, your own expertise, or just your ideas in a meeting, the problem isn't your personality. It's not that you're not a natural salesperson. The problem is you don't have a process. You're relying on improvisation in a game that rewards structure. And improvisation without structure isn't creativity, it's chaos. Today I'm going to walk you through a 7-step sales process that works in any industry: insurance, software, consulting, coaching, freelancing, even selling yourself in a job interview. This isn't theory I read in a textbook and decided to repeat. This is drawn from real frameworks used by some of the most disciplined sales organizations in the world, cross-referenced with what we know from neuroscience about how people actually make decisions. And more importantly, it's a process you can practice, refine, and repeat, starting this week. Let me start by telling you what most people get wrong. The dominant misconception about sales is that it's a talent. That some people are born closers and the rest of us are just awkward. You hear people say things like, "I'm not a salesperson," as if selling were a genetic trait like eye color. And this belief is incredibly convenient because it lets you off the hook. If selling is a talent you don't have, then you never have to get better at it. You never have to face the discomfort of asking someone to make a decision. But here's what the research actually shows. Studies from organizations that train thousands of salespeople, including one of the largest insurance companies in the world, found that the top performers weren't the most charismatic. They weren't the smoothest talkers. They were the most disciplined at following a process. They did the same things in roughly the same order every single time. And they got better not because they found some magical confidence, but because repetition built competence and competence built confidence. Not the other way around. This is consistent with what we know from the science of skill acquisition, what Anders Ericsson called deliberate practice. You don't get good at something by doing it casually 1,000 times. You get good by breaking the skill into components, practicing each component at the edge of your current ability, getting feedback and adjusting. The same principle applies to selling. The 7 steps I'm about to share with you aren't just a checklist. They're a practice architecture. Each step is a skill you can isolate and train. So let me give you the core judgment first, and then we'll unpack it. Selling is not persuasion. Selling is a structured process of helping another person make a decision that's already in their interest, by removing the friction that prevents them from seeing it clearly. That sentence is doing a lot of work, so let me break it apart. Helping another person make a decision, not making the decision for them, not tricking them. Helping, that's already in their interest. If what you're offering genuinely isn't in their interest, you shouldn't be selling it to them in the first place. That's not sales, that's fraud. By removing the friction, this is the part nobody talks about. Most people don't fail to buy because they don't want what you're offering. They fail to buy because there's friction, confusion, fear, distrust, bad timing, competing priorities, social pressure, information overload. Your job as a professional is to identify and reduce that friction, not to add pressure, not to manipulate, to clarify. Now, why does this work neurologically? Let me explain what's happening inside the brain of your prospect when you're trying to sell them something, because if you understand this, everything else makes sense. When a person encounters a new offer, a product, a service, a proposal, even an idea, 2 systems in their brain activate almost simultaneously. The first is the amygdala, part of the brain's threat detection system. It's scanning for danger. Is this person trying to take something from me? Am I being manipulated? Could this go wrong? The amygdala doesn't think in logic. It thinks in pattern recognition and emotion. If anything feels off, if you're pushing too hard, if your energy is desperate, if the situation feels unfamiliar, the amygdala flags it as a threat, and the person's guard goes up. They cross their arms. They say, "Let me think about it." They ghost you. That's not a rational decision. That's a survival response. The second system is the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for evaluation, planning, and judgment. This is where the person actually weighs the pros and cons, considers their budget, thinks about their needs. But here's the critical point. The prefrontal cortex can only do its job when the amygdala isn't screaming. If the person feels pressured, confused, or suspicious, the amygdala effectively hijacks the decision-making process. The rational mind gets sidelined. This is why high-pressure sales tactics sometimes produce a quick yes followed by buyer's remorse and a refund request. You overwhelmed the amygdala temporarily, but you didn't actually help the person decide. A good sales process does the opposite. Each step is designed to lower the amygdala's activation and create the conditions for the prefrontal cortex to engage. You're not bypassing someone's judgment, you're earning the right to speak to it. There's another mechanism at play here, and it's one most salespeople never think about: mirror neurons. When you interact with another person, specialized neurons in your brain automatically simulate aspects of what that person is experiencing. If the person you're talking to is calm, clear, and confident, your mirror neuron system registers that calmness and begins to produce a similar state in your own brain. If the salesperson is anxious, scattered, and needy, the prospect mirrors that anxiety, and anxious people don't buy. They flee. This is why the emotional state of the seller matters as much as the words they say. And this is also why a structured process is so powerful, not because it makes you robotic, but because it gives you a track to run on. When you know exactly what step you're on and what comes next, your own anxiety drops. Your prefrontal cortex stays engaged, you become calmer, and that calmness transfers to your prospect through mirror neurons. Structure doesn't kill authenticity, structure enables it. Now let me walk you through the 7 steps. I'm going to explain each one, tell you why it matters mechanically, and show you how to practice it. Step 1. Approach. This is the first contact, the first impression, the first few seconds. And most people blow it, not because they say the wrong thing, but because they enter the interaction in the wrong state. Here's what typically happens. Someone has a sales meeting, or they're about to make a cold call, or they're walking into a networking event. And in their head, they're running a script that sounds something like, "I need this sale. I need to impress this person. What if they say no? What if I sound stupid?" That internal monologue activates the stress response. Cortisol rises. The voice tightens, the body language contracts, and the prospect picks up on all of it, usually within the first 3 seconds, long before you've said anything substantive. The approach is not about having a perfect opening line. It's about entering the interaction with genuine curiosity and low attachment to the outcome. This is where Naval Ravikant's thinking becomes directly applicable. Naval talks about the importance of detachment, not detachment from effort, but detachment from specific outcomes. When you stop needing a particular conversation to produce a particular result, something paradoxical happens. You become more effective, because your energy shifts from taking to giving, from performing to exploring. And the other person's amygdala registers that shift immediately. Practically, what does a good approach look like? You walk in prepared, you've done your research, you know something about this person or their business, you have a reason for being there. But your internal posture isn't, "I need to close this deal." It's, "I'm here to find out if there's a genuine fit, and if there isn't, that's fine." That's not indifference, that's professional detachment. And it's incredibly powerful because it's rare. Most people they meet are trying to get something from them. You're the one who showed up trying to understand something about them. How do you practice this? Before every sales interaction, whether it's a call, a meeting, or even a message, take 30 seconds and ask yourself, What am I curious about regarding this person's situation? Not what am I going to pitch them? Curiosity, that single reframe changes your neurochemistry. It shifts you from threat mode to exploration mode. Your dopamine system engages differently when you're curious versus when you're anxious. Curiosity activates the brain's reward-seeking pathways in a way that feels open and expansive. Anxiety activates the avoidance pathways. Same brain, radically different state. Step 2. Building rapport and establishing trust. Now, rapport is one of those words that's been so overused in sales training that it's almost meaningless. People think building rapport means making small talk about the weather or complimenting someone's office. That's not rapport, that's filler, and most prospects can smell it immediately. Real rapport is the moment another person's nervous system decides you're safe. That's all it is. Safety. Not I like this person, that might come later. The first threshold is simply, this person is not a threat to me. How do you cross that threshold? 3 things, and they're all behavioral, not verbal. First, match their energy. If they're calm and deliberate, be calm and deliberate. If they're fast and energetic, pick up your pace slightly. This isn't mimicry, it's calibration. Mirror neurons work bidirectionally. When you're attuned to someone's rhythm, they feel understood at a preconscious level. Second, demonstrate that you've done your homework. Nothing builds trust faster than showing someone you invested time in understanding their world before you showed up. Not in a flattering way, in a substantive way. I noticed your company just expanded into the European market. That usually creates a specific set of challenges around compliance and localization. Is that something you're dealing with? That sentence communicates, I see you. I did the work, I'm thinking about your problems, not mine. Third, and this is the one almost nobody does, be willing to disqualify yourself. Early in the conversation, say something like, I don't know yet if what we do is the right fit for your situation. That's what I'd like to figure out together. That single sentence disarms the amygdala more than an hour of small talk, because you've just told the person, I'm not here to push, I'm here to evaluate alongside you. You've repositioned yourself from seller to advisor, and advisors get trust that sellers never do. Charlie Munger has a principle that's directly relevant here. He says, I have nothing to sell you. It's one of the most powerful positioning statements in business. Not because it's literally true. Munger was selling Berkshire Hathaway's value proposition his entire career, but because the intent behind it is real. When your posture is, I have nothing to sell you, but I might have something that's useful for you, the entire dynamic changes. You're no longer performing, you're consulting. And a consultative selling technique is fundamentally different from a transactional one. It creates the conditions for long-term relationships, not just quick transactions. Let me give you a real scenario. Imagine you're a freelance web developer and you've got a call with a mid-size e-commerce company. The typical approach is to show up, present your portfolio, list your capabilities, and hope they're impressed. The consultative approach is completely different. You show up and say, before I show you anything about what I do, I'd like to understand what's actually happening with your current site. What's working? What's frustrating your customers? Where are you losing revenue? You might spend the first 20 minutes just asking questions and listening, and at the end of those 20 minutes, you know more about their real problem than they expected you to. That's trust. Not because you said trust me, because you earned it through behavior. Step 3, identifying the real problem. This is where the sales process either becomes powerful or falls apart. And the reason it falls apart for most people is that they confuse the stated problem with the actual problem. Here's what I mean. A prospect will tell you something like, we need a new website, or we need better marketing, or I'm looking for a financial advisor. Those are stated problems. They're surface-level descriptions of a symptom. They're not the actual problem. The actual problem is always underneath. We need a new website might really mean, Our conversion rate has dropped 40% in 6 months. Our CEO is panicking, and my job is on the line if we don't fix it by Q3. That's a very different problem. And it requires a very different solution and a very different conversation. How do you get to the real problem? You ask what I call depth questions. Not what do you need, but what happens if you don't solve this? Not what's your budget, but what would solving this be worth to your business over the next 12 months? Not when do you want to start, but what's driving the timeline? These questions do something specific neurologically. They activate what's called the brain's elaboration network, the parts of the prefrontal cortex responsible for self-reflection, future projection, and meaning-making. When a person starts answering these deeper questions, they're not just giving you information. They're clarifying their own thinking. They're discovering things about their situation they hadn't articulated before. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. They start to see you as part of the solution because you're the one who helped them understand the problem. This is also where the Talmudic principle of honest exchange becomes critical. In the Jewish business tradition recorded in the Talmud, a transaction is only valid when both parties fully understand what's being exchanged. There's an ethical obligation to ensure the other person knows what they're buying and why. This isn't just morality, it's brilliant strategy, because when a person fully understands their own problem and fully understands how your solution addresses it, they don't need to be convinced. The decision becomes obvious. You haven't persuaded them. You've illuminated the path and they've chosen to walk it. Practically, here's how you train this skill. After every sales conversation, write down 2 things. What the prospect said their problem was, and what you believe their actual underlying problem is. If those 2 things are the same, you probably didn't ask deep enough questions. Do this for 30 days, and you'll develop a completely different ear. You'll start hearing the problem behind the problem in real time. Step 4, presenting the solution. Now notice where we are in the process. We're on step 4 out of 7. We haven't presented anything yet. Most amateur salespeople start here. They open with their pitch, their features, their credentials. That's like a doctor prescribing medication before examining the patient. It might accidentally work sometimes, but it's fundamentally irresponsible, and the patient knows it. When you present a solution, it must be mapped directly to the specific problem you uncovered in step 3, not to your full menu of services, not to your most impressive case study, to their problem. The language should mirror their language. If they said, "Our conversion rate dropped 40%, your presentation should say, "Here's how we'd address that 40% drop," not "Here's our comprehensive web optimization package." This is where the dopamine prediction system in the brain becomes relevant. Let me explain how this works because it's crucial to understanding why some presentations land and others don't. Your brain has a dopamine-based prediction system that's constantly comparing expectations to reality. When reality exceeds expectations, you get a dopamine surge. That's the feeling of pleasant surprise, of things being better than you thought. When reality matches expectations, you get a small, steady dopamine release. That's satisfaction, confidence, comfort. When reality falls below expectations, dopamine drops. That's disappointment, doubt, suspicion. When you present a solution that's clearly tailored to the problem the prospect just described, you're creating alignment between their expectation and your delivery. They expected you to understand. You proved it. Dopamine stays steady or rises. Trust deepens. But when you present a generic pitch that doesn't reflect what they told you, there's a mismatch. They just spent 15 minutes explaining their specific situation, and now you're showing them a one-size-fits-all deck. Dopamine drops, the amygdala reactivates. They start thinking, this person wasn't really listening. And they're right. There's a deeper principle here from Naval's framework about specific knowledge, what he calls knowledge that can't be trained for, that's uniquely yours. When you present a solution, you're not just presenting a product. You're presenting your specific knowledge, your unique understanding of how this product or service applies to this particular person's particular problem. That specificity is your competitive advantage. Anyone can recite features. Only someone who deeply understands the prospect's situation can connect those features to their actual pain. That's the difference between a salesperson and an advisor. And advisors command premium pricing. How do you practice this? Before every presentation, write one sentence. The specific problem I'm solving is. If you can't fill in that blank with precision, you're not ready to present. Go back to step 3. Step 5, handling objections. Here's where most people panic. The prospect says, it's too expensive, or I need to think about it. Or we're already working with someone, and the salesperson's stomach drops. They scramble, they start discounting, they start over-explaining, they start apologizing for their own price. Let me reframe what an objection actually is, because most people misunderstand it completely. An objection is not a rejection. An objection is unresolved friction. It's a signal that something in the prospect's mind hasn't been addressed. Maybe they don't fully understand the value. Maybe they're worried about a risk you haven't acknowledged. Maybe they need to justify the decision to someone else and they don't have the language to do it. An objection is a request for help disguised as resistance. When someone says, it's too expensive, they're rarely making a statement about absolute price. They're making a statement about perceived value relative to cost, which means the problem isn't your price, it's that the value hasn't been made concrete enough. Your response isn't to lower the price, it's to clarify the value. When you say it's too expensive, can you help me understand? Is it that the total amount is beyond your budget, or is it that you're not yet sure the return would justify the investment? That's not a trick question. That's a genuine clarification, and their answer tells you exactly what friction remains. Charlie Munger's inversion principle is extremely useful here. Munger says, instead of thinking about how to succeed, think about how to fail, and then avoid those things. Applied to objections, instead of thinking, how do I overcome this objection? Think, what did I fail to do earlier in the process that created this objection? Most objections in step 5 are symptoms of a gap in steps 2, 3, or 4. If you didn't build enough trust, they'll object on credibility. If you didn't identify the real problem, they'll object on relevance. If you didn't tailor your presentation, they'll object on value. This is a critical insight because it means the best objection handling is objection prevention. When you run the first 4 steps well, most objections dissolve before they appear. But when objections do come, and they will, your job is to acknowledge, clarify, and redirect. Acknowledge means validating their concern without agreeing to their conclusion. That's a completely fair question, and I'd want to be sure about that too. Clarify means asking a question to understand the real concern behind the stated concern. Redirect means connecting the answer back to the value you've already established. Let me give you a scene. Suppose you're selling a consulting engagement and the prospect says, "We've tried consultants before and it didn't work." The amateur response is to start defending your credentials. The professional response is, "That makes sense. Most consulting engagements fail because the scope wasn't defined well or the consultant didn't integrate deeply enough with your team's actual workflow. Can I ask what specifically went wrong last time? Because I want to make sure we're not making the same mistakes." You've just done 3 things simultaneously. You validated their experience. You showed that you understand the systemic reasons consulting fails, and you redirected the conversation from past failure to future prevention. The prospect's amygdala calms down because you acknowledged the threat. Their prefrontal cortex engages because you're problem-solving with them. Now here's an important boundary to name. Handling objections is not the same as pressuring someone into a corner. If after genuinely addressing their concerns, A person still doesn't want to move forward, that's not a failure. That's information. Maybe they're not the right fit. Maybe the timing is genuinely wrong. Maybe they have constraints you can't solve. A professional knows when to walk away. Walking away with grace is one of the most powerful sales skills there is, because it proves you're not desperate, and that proof often brings them back later. To practice this, keep an objection journal. Every time you hear an objection, write it down. Then write which earlier step in the process might have prevented it. Over time, you'll start to see patterns. You'll realize that 80% of your objections trace back to 2 or 3 gaps in your earlier process. Fix those gaps, and your objection rate drops dramatically. Step 6, closing. Closing is the step everyone obsesses over, and it's the step that matters least if you've done the first 5 steps correctly. Let me explain why. If you approached with genuine curiosity, built trust through demonstrated competence, identified the real problem, presented a solution that maps directly to that problem, and resolved the remaining friction in their mind, then closing isn't a dramatic moment. It's a natural conclusion. It's the next logical step. It feels less like asking for the sale and more like confirming the decision that's already been made. The worst thing you can do at this point is revert to high-pressure tactics. So, should I put you down for the premium package? Or this price is only good until Friday? These tactics activate exactly the threat responses you spent the entire conversation calming down. You've done all this careful work to create trust and clarity, and then in the last 2 minutes you throw a grenade into the room. A professional close sounds more like this. Based on everything we've discussed, it seems like option B addresses the main issues you raised, the conversion problem and the Q3 timeline. Does that feel right to you, or is there something we haven't covered? That's it. That's a close. It's an invitation to confirm, not a demand to comply. There's a neuroscience principle here about decision fatigue. By the time a person has been through a thorough consultative conversation, they've already made dozens of micro-decisions to trust you, to share information, to agree with your diagnosis, to see value in your approach. The close is just the final micro-decision in a long chain. If the chain is intact, the final link connects easily. If the chain is broken, if trust was never established, or the problem was never clearly defined, then no closing technique in the world will save you. The Talmudic business tradition has a relevant principle here too. A deal is only complete when both parties feel the exchange is fair and clearly understood. The close isn't the moment you extract a commitment. It's the moment you confirm mutual understanding. That's a completely different emotional texture, and the prospect feels that difference. Naval's framework adds another layer. Naval talks about how the best business relationships are positive-sum. Both parties walk away with more than they had before. If your close feels like a negotiation where someone has to lose, you've already failed. If your close feels like a mutual decision to create something valuable together, you've built not just a sale but a relationship. And relationships compound. One good client, properly served, generates referrals, testimonials, repeat business, and strategic introductions that no amount of cold outreach could ever produce. To practice closing, record yourself, audio is fine, doing a mock close. Listen to it. Notice where your voice tightens. Notice where you rush. Notice where you hedge. Those are the friction points in your own delivery. Smooth them out through repetition. After 10 or 15 practice rounds, your closing language will feel natural because it has become natural. That's the entire point of deliberate practice, not to make you sound scripted, but to make the right words feel like your own words. Step 7, getting referrals and building the long-term relationship. This is the step that 90% of salespeople skip. They close the deal, they move on to the next prospect, and they leave an enormous amount of value on the table. Here's the mechanism. When a person has just made a buying decision, especially one they feel good about, their brain is in a specific neurochemical state. Dopamine is elevated because the decision aligned with their expectations. Oxytocin may be present because they feel a sense of connection and trust with you. This is the single best moment to ask for a referral, not because you're exploiting their good mood, but because their brain is actively consolidating the experience as positive. They're literally more willing to connect you with others because their internal state is one of generosity and satisfaction. But here's the key. You don't ask for a referral by saying, "Do you know anyone who might need my services?" That's too vague. The brain can't process vague requests efficiently. Instead, you ask a specific question. You mentioned earlier that your colleague in the logistics department is dealing with a similar compliance challenge. Would it be helpful if I reached out to them, or would you prefer to make an introduction? That's specific. It's easy to process. It connects to something they already told you. And it positions the referral as you helping someone they care about, not as you prospecting through their Rolodex. The Talmud has a principle that maps perfectly here. If you want to live a life of abundance, you must create abundance for others. This isn't mystical, it's structural. When you genuinely help one person solve a real problem, they become an engine of further opportunity, not because you ask them to, but because people naturally share solutions that worked for them. Word of mouth isn't a marketing tactic. It's the organic byproduct of real value delivery, and this connects directly to Naval's concept of compounding. In business, as in investing, the most powerful force is compound growth. One client becomes 3, 3 become 10, 10 become 30, but this only works if the foundation is trust and genuine value. If you cut corners, if you overpromise, if you disappear after the sale, the compounding stops. Or worse, it reverses. One bad experience becomes 3 bad reviews, becomes a reputation problem that no amount of marketing can fix. Building the long-term relationship means staying in contact without being annoying. It means sending relevant information, not self-promotional newsletters. It means checking in on how the solution is working, not just when you have something new to sell. It means treating every client like a long-term relationship, not a transaction. This is how B2B professionals build sustainable businesses, not through endless cold outreach, but through deep, trusted networks that generate warm introductions. Here's an exercise for this step. After every closed deal, set 3 calendar reminders, one at 2 weeks, one at 60 days, one at 6 months. At 2 weeks, you check in to make sure implementation is going smoothly. At 60 days, you ask what results they're seeing. At 6 months, you have a genuine strategic conversation about what's next. And at some natural point in one of those conversations, you ask the specific referral question. That's a system. Systems beat willpower. Systems beat good intentions. Systems produce results that random effort never can. Now let me pull back and address something bigger, because this 7-step process is not just a sales framework. It's a framework for how human beings create value and exchange it with each other. Every meaningful interaction you have, a job interview, a partnership discussion, a pitch to investors, even a conversation with a friend where you're trying to help them see something they can't see, follows this same architecture. You approach, you build trust, you understand the real issue, you offer something relevant, you address concerns, you confirm mutual agreement, you nurture the relationship over time. This is what it means when people say everyone is in sales. They don't mean everyone should be pushy. They mean everyone is constantly exchanging value, ideas, and credibility with other people. And the people who do it consciously, with a repeatable process and genuine intent to serve, are the people who build extraordinary careers and businesses. Not because they're manipulative, because they're useful. And being useful, consistently and strategically, is the most sustainable competitive advantage there is. Let me say something about how all of this connects to your own growth as a person, Because if you treat sales as just a technique for extracting money from people, you will eventually burn out or become someone you don't want to be. But if you treat sales as the discipline of helping others make better decisions, something different happens. You grow. Every conversation becomes a learning opportunity. Every objection becomes a mirror that shows you where your thinking or your communication isn't clear enough. Every rejection becomes data about where your process broke down. And over time, you develop a set of skills, empathy, precision, emotional regulation, strategic thinking, that make you more effective not just in sales, but in every domain of life. This is what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described in his research on creativity and flow. He found that the most creative, most productive people weren't the ones who waited for inspiration. They were the ones who set up systems, structured tasks with clear goals, immediate feedback, and a difficulty level that matched their skill. That's exactly what a sales process is. It's a flow architecture. Each step has a clear goal. The prospect's responses give you immediate feedback. And as you get better, you raise the difficulty, handling more complex objections, engaging with higher-level prospects, closing larger deals. The process itself becomes the source of engagement and growth. You don't need motivation. You need a system that makes motivation unnecessary. I want to come back to something I said at the beginning, because it's the most important idea in this entire video. Selling is not about you. The moment it becomes about you, your quota, your ego, your need to prove yourself, you've already lost. Not just the sale, something more important. You've lost the capacity to see the other person clearly. And if you can't see them clearly, you can't help them. And if you can't help them, you have nothing to offer. The best salespeople I've encountered, and the best frameworks I've studied, from MetLife's training systems to the principles in the Talmud to Naval's thinking about long-term wealth creation, all converge on the same point. Wealth flows to people who create genuine value for others, consistently, through disciplined systems, over long periods of time. There is no shortcut, there is no hack. There is only the process, done well, done repeatedly, and refined through honest self-evaluation. So here's what I'd encourage you to do this week. Pick one sales conversation, or any conversation where you're trying to create an outcome. Before you go in, write down one sentence. The real problem I'm trying to help them solve is. Enter the conversation with curiosity, not pitch energy. Ask at least 3 depth questions before you present anything. When an objection comes, don't fight it, clarify it. And when it's over, write down what you learned. Do this for 30 days and I promise you something will shift. Not because of magic, not because of positive thinking. Because you're building neural pathways through repetition. You're training your prefrontal cortex to stay engaged under social pressure. You're conditioning your mirror neurons to produce calmness instead of anxiety. You're rewiring your brain's prediction system to expect process instead of chaos. That's how people who understand the sales process steps actually get better at how to sell in any industry. Not through tricks, not through charisma. Through a consultative selling technique that respects both your intelligence and your prospects. Wealth is not about what you know. It's about whether your knowledge can create value in the real world. And sales is the bridge between what you know and what you earn. Without that bridge, your knowledge stays theoretical. It stays private. It stays poor. The process works, not because it's complicated, because it's honest. If this gave you something real to think about, share your perspective in the comments and follow along for more. Comment prompt for the audience. Which of the 7 steps do you find hardest to do consistently? And what do you think that reveals about what you're actually afraid of?